This is basically an effort to look at one contract out of tens upon thousands of contracts that has had a difficult record in terms of being compliant with contract provisions, and see if by looking at this contract we cannot learn some lessons about contract oversight. And I think it's particularly important because this particular contract deals with the security of our embassy in theater. We are obviously in a conflict in Afghanistan, and so therefore there's extreme pressure on the State Department to make sure that the embassy is secure, and that's why I think this particular contract should get extra scrutiny and oversight as it relates to how the contractor has performed under the provisions of the contract. This contract is about a $190 million contract to provide the guard force at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. It is a unique contract in some ways because at most U.S. embassies around the world, the State Department hires local nationals if they need guard force assistance. In Iraq and Afghanistan, however, the State Department has decided to contract out the embassy's security to a mix of Americans, expatriates, and third country nationals. In Kabul, our embassy security force is largely comprised of individuals from Nepal. The Kabul embassy contract can be viewed as a case study on how mismanagement and lack of oversight can result in poor performance. Instead of letting the contract end after the first year, the State Department chose to exercise the first option year. And we have learned the Department intends to exercise the second option year, which begins July 1. If they do, the Kabul embassy will be guarded by this contractor at least until next June. In testimony to be delivered today, the witness from the State Department has said at no time was the security of the American personnel at the U.S. Embassy compromised. I hope that is the case. I have been told that it is, but the State Department's own prior statements indicate that we have a problem, and that, in fact, the U.S. Embassy could have been at risk, and this is something we need to examine closely. The State Department and AG&A have also advised the contractor is now fully compliant with requirements relating to staffing. I am satisfied the Department and AG&A have made major progress, and there are no remaining glaring deficiencies which endanger the security of the embassy. But I am not satisfied with the record of mismanagement that is before us today and the oversight that this contract had. So my question for the hearing today is this the best we can do? Thank you, Mr. Moser, for being here, and we welcome your testimony.
Thank you very much, Senator McCaskill. Chairman McCaskill, Ranking Member Collins, thank you for the opportunity to appear today before you to discuss the State Department's management of contracts to provide security services at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul.
Let me start by bringing your attention to a couple of documents which don't seem to reconcile completely with your testimony today. On July 19, 2007, and if we can put this document up, this was after the contract had begun, and I'm quoting the document, "I consider the contract deficiencies addressed below to endanger performance of the contract to such a degree the security of the U.S. Embassy in Kabul is in jeopardy," end of quote. And then a year later, a letter to AG&A, once again in a document from the State Department, AG&A's inability to permanently correct personnel staffing shortages has negatively impacted the security posture of the local guard program for the U.S. mission to Kabul. The staffing situation has further deteriorated to a level that gravely endangers performance of guard services in a high-threat environment such as Afghanistan. These are two documents that were generated by the State Department that has this language in them. I'm trying to reconcile your testimony today with those documents and want to give you a chance to do just that.
So really what I think that you see in the first letter, and really in the subsequent one is too, is what I've actually encouraged all the contracting officers that work in my section to do, which is to be tough with the contractor at the very beginning and make sure that they know that we're serious about these things. Now, I'm not going to say that these were necessarily exaggerations, but what we want to emphasize here, that if they did not correct these deficiencies with the things that were left out, that were not done really properly, yes, this could end up to be a serious deficiency in the security posture of the embassy. But I didn't want them to go out and say to the contractors, oh, well, you need to correct these because these don't comply with dotting the I's and crossing the T's in the contract. We want to tell them that these things really do have real consequences. But at the same time, the people on the ground said, for now, this is okay. Now, Senator McCaskill, I do want to make one point more on that. One of the reasons why that the RSOs on the ground, and I talked both to the previous RSO who was there in 2007 and to the one that's currently on the ground in Afghanistan, and one of the things that they both, or that the one that was previously in Afghanistan emphasized to me is that the previous contract, the bridge contract, was so bad and security was so poor under that, that we were really, that the transition to Armor Group was still a major improvement in the security posture of the embassy. And to the extent that the guard posts could be covered, the requirements of the contract were met in terms of the actual security, they didn't want to go through transitioning to yet another contractor. And I can be a little bit more specific with your question.
Okay. So you're anticipating kind of my next question.
Sure.
Let's, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
Okay.
And I'm good at doing that, so stop me if I do it. But what you're saying is that the first letter was meant to be serious with them, but it probably wasn't quite as serious as it sounded? Is that what you're saying? Well,
Senator McCaskill, I think maybe to put it this way, the bridge contract was terrible, and we really were concerned about the security at the embassy under that, under the previous bridge.
I understand that.
I have a new contractor, and frankly, Senator McCaskill, I think that you want the contracting officers in the federal government to be tough on contractors, particularly when they're starting into a new contract.
Okay. And so let's just for purposes of this discussion, let's take that first letter and say this is the new sheriff, the new contractor,
that's right.
And you're going to be tough.
Yep.
But then a year later, you use the language gravely endangers performance of guard services in a high-threat environment such as Afghanistan. Now, this is a full 12 months later, Mr. Moser. I mean, are we still exaggerating to get their attention, or were we not saying what was accurate at that point in time?
So we knew that there were problems, but that said, and as I said in my testimony, the day-to-day tasks on the ground were still adequate, and the security was sound.
I think it's important to put on the record right now that the first letter you've made an effort to explain, the second letter you've made an effort to explain, but I think it's very important to point out that on the initiative of the state, in March of this year, you did a check and inspected the guards and found that 18 posts had been left empty by the guards on duty at the embassy, and that was March of this year. So
no, March of last year. Was that 2008? Or was that
no,
2009?
This is 2009. Okay. That's this year, the third year of the contract. I mean, you know, the reason we have these unusual situations in Iraq and Afghanistan is because there was a decision made that nationals were too dangerous. We couldn't hire nationals because of the nature of the threat. So what do? We hire people from Nepal who can't speak English for $800 a month. Now, I got to tell you, if this is about the locals being not sufficient to guard our embassy and theater because of the threat, it seems to me that we're not going up the food chain, we're going down the food chain. I mean, these people still, they've told you they can speak English, but you still have not made any verification that the people that are standing guard at this embassy can communicate in English. Isn't that correct?
Senator McCaskill, we are currently evaluating the information that we have from Armor Group North America, and they have actually attested to us that the English certifications are all correct now for all of the Gurkha guards.
And they also told you they're going to have weapons a year ago.
Yes, but Senator, with all due respect,
I guess I'm a little worried that at this juncture, with this kind of record on contract performance, that them just telling you that they're now in compliance, it seems to be sufficient for you.
In fact, our attitude with contractors in general is not trust but verify. Our attitude is more like we don't believe what you're saying, we're going to check it out. And we really do try to do that in this contract as well. That's the reason why I have to have those eyes and ears on the ground in Kabul to go out and check with the Gurkhas and see if they can come out with a complete sentence of English. And I have to have them go and check the guard post and make sure that they're manned.
When you checked the last time, could they?
Excuse me? I'm sorry.
When you checked, could they come out with a sentence in English when you checked?
Well, from what the indications that we had from the RSO, yes, they've made a lot of progress and that things are better. We're going to go over the data. This issue is still, we think that it may be resolved, but we're not entirely certain.
In January of 2008, AG&A informed the State Department that the logistics manager, the official responsible for AG&A's contracting for Embassy Guard Force, may have been buying counterfeit goods and had purchased over $380,000 worth of equipment from a company owned and managed by his wife. What actions did the State Department take at the point in time that it learned that information?
At the point in time when we learned that information, we told AG&A to continue its investigation, report back to us, and once we'd learned that this was true, we asked for the individual to be removed from the contract, the person that was their employee.
And what about the wife's company? Was there any investigation? Was there any thought to having a fraud investigation? Because clearly, when you have that kind of arrangement, speaking as a former auditor, that's generally when you have kickbacks going on. That's generally when you have money being exchanged under the table. Was there any thought at the State Department that this would be a time that you would want your fraud investigators to look at what was going on in this contract in case taxpayer money had been stolen?
In our contract, we say you will give the guard a coat. We don't say what kind of coat, quality of coat, anything like that. So to us, the fraud wasn't really committed against us. The contractor was giving the guard a coat. We didn't know what the coat was. So there really wasn't any fraud against us. Now, you know, we're more than happy to call the OIG when we think that there's been something untoward, call our own Inspector General when we think there's something untoward in our contract. But we didn't ask the contractor to provide a certain brand or a certain quality. We just specified the item.
Okay. So I want to make sure that I understand this. If the United States government is not seen as the victim of a financial crime, there is no interest in looking at, for fraud purposes, activity of a contractor that could in fact be criminal. Is that what you're testifying, Mr. Moser?
Now, Senator McCaskill, I'm not sure if I can really answer that question. I'm just not, you know, I know that in this case, all I can do is talk about what we did in this case. And what we did was the person was removed from the contract. We weren't really affected by the counterfeit goods, and we didn't do any further, you know, anything further on this.
Well, I have to tell you I'm surprised. I think most people would be surprised that if you knew that someone that was a contractor for the United States government, that someone who is a major acquisitions personnel within that contract, if you found out that they were buying counterfeit goods from their wife, and it was $380,000 worth of goods, even if it was a fixed price contract, it would seem to me that somebody would go, we need to ask some questions here because it may be that we've got criminals working for us. You know, I mean, do we have no responsibility to make sure that the people who are working for us are following basic guidelines in terms of following the law?
Senator McCaskill, this is what I would say, is that the person that my contracting officer has a relationship with is the company. The company informed us that this activity was going on and that they needed to investigate it. They took appropriate action by dismissing the employee involved in this.
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is maybe appropriate action was sending that person to prison. How do we know they took appropriate action if you never asked the question?
Well, I can't answer that.
All right. Finally, Mr. Moser, this contract is going to be renewed, correct?
Our intention is to renew this contract.
Okay.
Or not actually to renew. What it is to actually exercise the second option year. We think that exercising the next option year is really the best alternative.
Would it change your opinion as to whether or not you would want to renew an option year if you knew the contractor didn't want to work under this contract anymore?
Well, Senator McCaskill, if the contractor doesn't want to work under the contract anymore, he should give us a formal notice that he doesn't.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moser.